morning. Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Today is Wednesday, November 6, 2024. And it is a very interesting day. First thing I would like to say is the opinions and some statements that I may make today are not necessarily the opinions or automatic agreements that our guest, they may not be in full agreement in some of the things I say. And as she is a professional, I just feel obligated, even more so today, to protect Black women. And so you can tell in my energy right now, and based on what I am still classifying as the projected call, because Bishop Bragg used to often teach that you can't have a miracle unless it is a dire situation. So numbers are still being counted. And if you don't know to what I'm referring, I'm talking about the election. As it stands right now, the projected call is for he who used to occupy the White House. And as it looks right now, the projection is that he'll be going back. I will also say that with the team, we had this show planned prior to last night. And it, for me, today is even more relevant because I won't show y'all because of people's confidence. I got like 5 or 6 text messages around hurt, disappointment, bewilderment. What are we going to do? Had some conversations about racism, emboldenedness. And so even more so today, it's important that we bring a professional into the space that, one, affirms what we're feeling for a lot of us. And I got to give balance and space. There are some people that are celebrating this across the spectrum of gender, race, class. And so America has spoken. However, for a lot of us Americans, or other side, this side, I'll get it together. You get the message. It's very interesting being Black in America. And so as that is a large part of the population that this platform serves, we're getting ready to bring in our guest. And again, I will reiterate, my statements and opinions may not necessarily be hers. And so without further ado, she is not a stranger to the Java Cafe, was very instrumental in a lot of the mental health and clinical spaces when it comes to us dealing with COVID. And we've talked about a few topics, but always around mental health. And so I would like to present to some again and introduce to others, Dr. Ronke Pederson. I always, early on used to say Peterson, and early on he was like, no, it's Pederson. And so good to see you. Last time I think you were with us, you had not delivered yet.
Yeah, so last time must have been 2023, yes, and I was expecting a little one, and if you can see it in the cheeks, I'm expecting another little one next year. So there you go. We can celebrate that amidst all of our sadness and disappointment.
We can definitely celebrate that. Y'all celebrate this Black woman expanding the family, and so we might as well just go to scheduling you once a year. Dr. Ronke, one of the things I'm going to name, and even through the seriousness of this conversation, a way that a lot of us get through grief, mourning, bad situations is our Black joy. And so I hope to, as much as possible, induce a lot of that today. And so I have to ask you, as someone that moves in a space of mental health, takes on often a lot of your patients' life issues, not saying that you don't know how to, clinical supervision and pass off, but you're a Black woman. We were going to talk about the experience of the mental health impact post-election. I think you're aware that today, for many, the mental health impact changed in the last few hours.
Yeah.
So please greet the folks, say hello. And then, if you don't mind, describe from your experience, how do you think our mental health is as a society, and we've been here before.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
2016, 8 years ago. So the floor is yours. Welcome back.
Well, thank you so much for having me today, of all days. And I agreed to be on here before I knew what was going to be happening
Indeed.
this morning. And I think to be very honest and transparent with everyone, I thought, you know what, I'll come on the show and we won't know, and so I can talk in all hypotheticals about our mental health. And here we are, and we have to talk about grief. We have to talk about not just anxiety, but not just election anxiety or political anxiety, but the grief, that many people are experiencing, especially people who come from certain communities and backgrounds like my own, as a Black person, as a woman, as an immigrant turned citizen of this country. And so I just want to start off with really validating all of the emotions and feelings that people are having this morning. And I think it might surprise some people that it's not just the people for whom maybe things didn't go the way they wanted it to go. They voted in a particular way and it didn't go the way they wanted it to go. But it could be people who were uncommitted, people who chose not to vote, people who are immigrants and legally here, and what that means for them. They weren't part of the voting bloc, right? But they might be on a journey towards being future Americans. And so I just want to start with the word validate, that the first thing we need to do is sit and validate the feelings of people in our lives, of ourselves, and understand, that we can't just treat today like any other day. This is not like any other day. This is a day where we're sitting with a lot of, sort of reckoning as to what does this mean for me? What does this mean personally, professionally? What does it mean for my community, depending on what community you come from? And we can bring in the word intersectionality here and, talk about all of the intersectional identities that many of us hold. And that unless, and I'm going to say this very carefully, and hopefully it's not something that's taken out of context, but unless you are a cisgender white male, that intersectional space that many of us hold means that we can't just sort of say, whatever policies are coming through, they're not really going to affect me that much. Nothing really is going to change in my life. I'm going to just keep on living my life as I'm living my life. There are things that could substantially change for people who sit within certain intersectional identities that are known to be disproportionately affected by, by unfair policies and inequitable policies.
It is, Dr. Ronke, important, and I thank you for validating a lot of the concern for those that either move in policy, for those that move in healthcare, because as it's been asserted in the news and the media, as we perceive things that are as they're reported now, the medical industry is quite concerned about what's being reported in reference to influence on leadership of medical policies and legislation, in reference to vaccinations, in reference to fluoride. And so we started off by checking in on you, but just want to, hold our medical providers up, and especially those that are psychiatrists and counselors and licensed clinical social workers, because as we saw 8 years ago, those that were seeking therapy, numbers went up. Depression. I don't know if 988 was around in 16, but presumably phone calls to hotlines and different things went up. And I just want to really name again, because I saw a post from someone who moves in a sanctuary city in the education space, and they sense from their students right now that this fear and anxiety and anticipation is real. Generally, and then now we have young people who are dealing with the trauma of being migrated here, adjusting. And so level setting and giving validation and affirming a lot of your demographic as a Black woman is very interesting as far as what they're thinking about, because right, wrong, or indifferent, this will be less commentary for me and more getting into naming things and talking about tools. But I just think it's important to level set your affirmation of, for a lot of people, despite last night, let's just name again, this was already planned. As you said, you committed to coming. Even now, our awareness and our addressing, I was thinking about this when you were talking, in general, away from policy, away from it's hard to say, away from our fears and perception of things that may come. Election season is just very strenuous on the candidates, on the potential outcomes and whatnot. So we just wanted to say in general that is an issue. And so you talked about grief, and I think a lot of times when people hear grief, they automatically associate it with the transition of someone no longer being with us in this realm. Can grief be associated for some, for those that are concerned about the results, the projected call right now? Are they grieving?
Yeah, and I think about, if you want to talk about, sort of the different stages of grief that we go through, whether we skip stages or we hop around them, words like denial and depression and bargaining and, trying to come to terms with a loss. I think that language is helpful for us because we might be in different places this morning, and we might be in a different place come Friday or Saturday. Today's Wednesday. We might find ourselves kind of going back and forth where, you do a check-in, which we should always do check-ins on ourselves. You do a check-in and you say, okay, I think I feel okay. I think I'm gonna, take these steps to move forward. I'm gonna maintain my daily routine. I'm gonna do what I can to exercise, to sleep well, all of those things. And you feel like you're in control. And then the next day you're like, I feel this wave come over me because something happened, in the news, or you saw something that reaffirmed a fear that you had, you're sort of anticipating, what's coming next. And so I think words like, or categories like grief can be helpful when we're going through emotions that don't quite add up in our minds. Like, how could I go from, feeling relatively okay to feeling kind of down and depressed, and then I'm starting to bargain about, well, what about this and what about that, and is it truly a loss? All of those types of feelings and the confusion that can happen and set in is certainly, I would just say within the normal spectrum when you're going through something where something has happened that you weren't, fully, in some ways, there's no way to prepare, right? Like you sort of say, oh, I'm going to prepare for any of the outcomes. But the reality is, we find ourselves in a position where it's really hard to prepare for something so significant in a sense, because there's so much going on in the world. Now, I just want to remind everyone watching that we came out of 2020, a global pandemic that was 4 years ago. That wasn't 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. That was just 4 years ago. And 2020 and the global pandemic, the racial reckoning of 2020, all of the trauma when it comes to, the racial trauma that, was sort of concentrated into one summer in some ways. Breonna Taylor's conviction, the conviction of one of the police officers who shot into her home, just came out recently, like maybe a couple of weeks ago. So we're still sort of working through all of that. And going into 2021, 2022, January 6th, what happened on January 6th of 2021 and the impact of that. And then we've gone through now a concentrated, number of wars breaking out around us that we're somehow involved in, whether it was Ukraine or what's happening in Gaza. And so when you think about news consumption and because of social media and our access to information, there's no burying your head in the sand, and so when normally, maybe in previous years, at least for those of us who are less than 50, I would say, there's this sense of, at least there's some sense of balance or control, or, that you can sort of lean in on. But we went through some of the most chaotic years of our generation in the last 3 to 4 years. And coming into this moment, we can't isolate this moment from all of that, and that's so important.
It's a couple of things there. I thought you were going to say, we can't isolate the moment, but we also can't isolate. And at some point we'll talk about, community and what that does for us. It's interesting that you talk about social media and media. Boston While Black had, a watch party last night that I got to host. And we talked about where people get their information from. And it is social media. And we also learned that, the devices, it's a CNN app, but because it's on the phone, it's still considered social media. So you get that perspective, then you get misinformation and whatnot. And so, I heard things like you talk about what some may simplify as there are triggers that all of this intersectionality of post-pandemic, of the election, of some reasons why, to be balanced, that, some people feel that the economy was the number one issue and they're not seeing ways out, prices rising. That is a lot to handle. And so what are the type of things, Dr. Ronke, that come with, we know presumably stress, depression, anxiety. I don't know if bewilderment is a clinical term. But
maybe more philosophical, but
more philosophical. Okay. Clinically philosophical. But what are some of the things that people, I think it's important to name them, because I think you would agree that what you're about to name, it's normal. It's normal to feel some of the things, some of the things that we're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I think, when we're talking about anxiety or, the stress that comes from anxiety, some basic things for us to remember, changes in sleep patterns where, your sleep is more restless or you're having trouble falling asleep, muscle tension and just feeling that, you're holding on to tension in your body, and it's real muscle tension, not just, I feel a little achy, but, you're starting to your body's starting to keep a score, on some of the things that you're carrying. And that's why it's so important to do a check-in, because the body is tricky in a sense, right? Because you can convince yourself that you're fine, but if you're not really using sort of those mindfulness techniques to really check in to see how you're doing, you'll find yourself feeling down and depressed and sad and asking yourself, but why? Why am I down or depressed or, or sad? And it's important to have a sense and a pulse, on how you're feeling. Things like irritability, things like getting more, tense with the people around you, getting more testy with the people around you. Anger is a big one. And I think anger is something, when I work with community partners and through some of the research that I do, I think anger is one of those areas when it comes to anxiety and depression that we don't always talk about, but is very relevant, culturally relevant to us, especially in communities that are traditionally like disadvantaged or underserved. And that's because the normal routes through which we would deal with some of the frustrations we have are closed out and I don't know if that makes sense, but this sense of I can't, through the normal routes of obtaining justice, get equitable, needs met. And when that happens, what is internalized is anger. And so anger becomes one of those symptoms that we do have to check in on. And unfortunately, if you can't, have an outlet for that anger, it sort of either turns in on ourselves or turns in on those closest to us, because there's not the normal, outlets for that anger. So those are some of the symptoms that I think are really important for us to keep in mind. And the last, couple things I'll add is changes in appetite. We're either eating more than we normally do or eating less than we normally would. And along with the changes in sleep, it could be like just repetitive thoughts. And we now have the term doom scrolling on like social media apps, and what that sort of does in terms of tiring out our brain, because our brain can only handle so much, input in terms of information that we might consider negative.
Dr. Ronke, there's a few things there that come to mind. One of the questions that I wanted to check in with you about is the impact of everything that you named, how it demonstrates itself and the impact. And is there a difference, the way it comes out and demonstrates itself in men versus women? And we will name that we are generally talking around traditional gender identities, not naming the spectrum of trans men and trans women as well. So we just want to name that. And I think it's so important as we're just coming out of Domestic Abuse Awareness Month.
Yeah.
The numbers indicate that the victims of domestic abuse tend to be more women. There was a lot of mansphere language that I heard. And in the context of what you just talked about, as far as anger, can we specifically speak to, and I'll, bring a brother psychologist, psychiatrist in soon, brothers, but we can take this information from this wonderful queen. There's that comes with Black men. There is a two-sided thing of in some of the debriefing, there is the thing that a certain party did not go after and embrace fully Black men. There's the piece that comes with this assertion that Black men identify with one of the candidates because of being a convicted felon. There's a lot I've named there. The ultimate is there a difference of the impact of some of the stuff that we've named on men and women? But maybe if you can end with speaking to men about being real about some of the things that they are feeling, and speak to men and women, because Black women, you had a Black woman running, and there's so much with that. I got a chance, and I believe you're familiar with the, a model of exit polls. And some of these stats, Dr. Ronke, are very interesting as far as allyship and all that. And so there's a lot that we're considering. Does it weigh and impact differently on a man versus a woman?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that that from a historical standpoint, and from the biology of some of the differences that we see in terms of sex differences at both like a molecular level, but also at a more macro level, are important to talk about. I will say anecdotally that I think a lot about anger as a symptom because of some of the Black male participants that have come through some of my research studies, and how they've articulated the disenfranchisement, of their positions in society, and how, there are certain traditional roles that around feeling like I want to be a protector. When we have certain traditional things we say, right? I have sons and I have daughters, and there are, certain things that that I expect, my sons to do. They're older. I want you to protect. I think it's a different kind of protection, right? Like when you're saying to a big sis, I want you to protect your siblings. It's a different kind of protection you're talking about. When you say to a big brother, I want you to protect your younger ones, it's a different kind of protection. And I think when that ability to protect on either side is taken away, especially when we're talking about Black men, and we know historically that was a big thing, taking, the mass incarceration of Black men, even when we talk about something like marijuana and how it was disproportionately affecting Black men, and the attack on the household, right, in a sense. And so this sense of
Dr. Ronke, can I chime in as we've talked about this as well?
Yes.
Forget the mass incarceration. Let's go back to that point around slavery.
Yes.
And how men were taken away, from the home. And that lives, as we've talked about before, those experiences they transcend within our DNA.
But it's huge, and it gets recycled over and over again in different forms and different ways. When like the attack on Black business and all of those things, so that even when there's this desire for a reset, but I think that piece of that aspect of anger is certainly something that is so pertinent to the experience of Black men in this country. And it's justified in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is your body has to process. And if all the normal ways of processing are taken away from you, then it's like a turning in on yourself. It's almost like, your cells fighting against each other. And those are things that, we have language for those things. We have language around weathering. We have language around, around epigenetics, right? Epigenetics is about the generational aspect of it, like kind of, sitting in our bodies. And so it really is sort of like you're given a multiple choice test and you're given 5 options, right? And then people, society starts to eliminate all of your options. And what is left is, all you can pick is option E, anger. It's that kind of thing. And that's the, part of it that we don't name enough, I think, when we talk about some of these things.
And it thank you, because there's a lot of validation there for, again, policy differences and whatnot. A lot of what you named lends to some of those exit poll stats when it comes to Black men, the electorate, and Black men. A thought, so I'll name it, also being bombarded with an intentionality around misinformation, and the misinformation in which was put out there was around mass incarceration. And, this is what this Black woman, did to you, brings up systemic dynamics. And a Black woman, there's a whole nother Zoom or After Dark we can have about dynamics within, our communities and men and women. You spoke to Black men. Thank you for validating a lot of, because I remember some years ago, Dr. Ronke, I fought hard to not come off at work, and in community, I didn't really care too much as an activist. I'd be the angry Black man. But one day I had to post and said, and I found myself saying rather, oh, I'm angry. And I felt that my anger was justified. So thank you for naming that, because it is real for a lot of brothers out there that they are angry, and it lent to some decision making in reference to, and a lot of that anger comes to with. We'll move to the women in 2 seconds. You talk about protection in America, in this society, the way we're set up, the weathering of being a financial provider in the context of economics being what drove the increase in Black men. I'll get away from the commentary because I was going to go somewhere else. Women, our queens, and I say especially Dr. Ronke today because of the candidate. Because women, for one, they saw a woman in 16. They saw now a Black woman who had to justify, assert, define, clarify her Blackness That is interesting.
Mhm.
How does everything that we're talking about? Well, first of all, is it yes or no that there's a difference in how these things demonstrate in men and women? You talked about the anger in men. Does that same anger, or if not, how do the things that we talk about show up in women? Is there a difference?
Yeah. And I do want to clarify one point, whether we're talking about men or women, or any one across the spectrum, is um, the stereotype of like the angry Black man or the stereotype of the angry Black woman is one that is not valid. Like when it comes to the stereotype aspect of it, because many times when we're talking about the stereotype, um, we're usually talking about a way to invalidate justice, like that we're desiring or seeking, right? So I'm being treated poorly in my workplace. I was stopped by police unfairly. I was treated in one way or the other, and I'm now asserting myself, right, as I deserve justice. That, where society labels us as angry, is like a different beast in and of itself,
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Because that is really about invalidating our righteous anger, right, and our justified anger. But the part where we're sort of turning in on ourselves and we're sort of hurting each other and hurting ourselves, whether as women or men, whatever the case may be, I just want to separate those two things out, like the stereotype aspect of it and then the part of it where it is sort of this manifestation of a symptom, right, that's coming out.
I'm agreeing, and thank you, because there. I believe that what we're doing right now is one. The validation is real, and not in this sexy trending. Oh, we're going to validate. No. This is very different, as you said. The line of demarcation of a symptom, a reaction, a response to a symptom, versus a stereotype that is really framed in the context of the system. Sorry, go
Yes,
ahead.
exactly. So it's just the external versus sort of internal, and like what we're talking about. I think we have to. I just want to focus into just on self-care. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of each other in a time like this. Um, there I don't think anyone would be surprised. Maybe some people might be, I don't know, that I would be in support of having a woman president. I want a woman president. I want a Black woman president. I wrote an article I think it was in 2020 for the Grio on the need for a Black female Supreme Court justice and how Black women kept being passed over, right, for that position, and the importance of representation. And we know that in maternal health in general, the impact of having representation in terms of um, diversity among medical professionals, among OBGYNs, and the impact on infant mortality, the impact on maternal mortality. And so when we talk about representation, it's so important to remember we're talking about life or death for some people in some communities. And this country was built on no taxation without representation. That was the birthplace of this country. And so they understand the need for representation. They said, "Oh, King, you're not representing us. And so we need to represent ourselves." And so I think for communities like my own, in whatever intersectional spaces that I occupy, it is extremely disappointing to have now 47 presidents and not one woman, not one Black woman. It is disappointing, and it does feel like a loss, and it is invalidating, on a lot of levels. But I have daughters, and I have to hold, and I'm saying this, from a first person standpoint, because in moments like this, the therapist, the psychiatrist has to have the ability to be vulnerable too, in terms of, how the whatever situation or circumstance we're talking about affects us as individuals. And even as a medical professional, and all of the talk about the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, all of those federal agencies affect the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. And what's going to happen with those agencies, that's something that's, very, very real to me. But I think for us as a community, we have to practice self-care. We have to practice, finding joy and joyful spaces. We have to limit our social media input that we're getting. Some people advise putting a timer on yourself to say, I'm not very good at that, so I'll confess. I'm not very good. So I'm telling you what to do. Do as I say, not as I do. But you have to limit the amount of input. You have to limit the amount of arguments you're having with people. This might not be a time to go into deep debate, with the other side to say, oh, these are the reasons why, I'm angry with you for voting for this person, that person. This might be a time, don't isolate, like you said, Jimmy. I love that you said the word, to avoid isolation, because that's the last thing you want. And there might be a temptation to isolate because you're like, nobody understands me. So it's harder for people who are maybe surrounded by people who might disagree with them. So it's good to, find people if you need to make a phone call, if people are, far away from you. But if you're around people who can, you don't want to go into sort of this like negative spiral of, all is lost. You want people who can validate your feelings, who can have empathy, and you can share that empathy amongst yourselves, but also perspective shifting away from the perspective of all is lost to maybe there's some things that I can control. For me, something as simple as I can control what I'm teaching my kids in this moment, because I had the unfortunate experience this morning of turning on the news. And I don't know if we have time for this short story, but I had the unfortunate experience of turning on the news, and my 6-year-old daughter is standing next to me, and the clip that comes up is a clip from a very right-wing individual talking about hitting women. and I look at her and I just think that is the part that is part of that grief process of like, oh, I have to, what I can control in this moment is I can turn to her and say, oh, that's not acceptable. That's not how we talk. That's not how, a man should talk to a woman. And, all of these things that I have to address. And that's what I can control in that moment. It's sort of a sad moment for me, as a woman, as a Black woman. But we have to think about what can we control and what can't we control, and the things we can control are the things we really need to focus in on.
I went and just looked at a comment because I want to, be fair to those on Instagram, and a lot of what you just said resonates with a brother reached out to me and he said, I'm hurt and I need some words of encouragement. And I had to be my authentic self. I said, the first thing is pray. And reference to drinking water, and then the African proverb of when you pray, move your feet, be active in local PTAs and things like that. And so we definitely thank you for transitioning, because that was going to be the last question. In what are ways that we can offset some of the stress? We can call 988. If you don't have that circle to which you referred of people around you, we can, and I'm not typically, unless you really do something real bad, I don't like, quote unquote, or unless you're a troll, I don't typically block people on social media. But for my own mental health, there are some people that hospitably, when I see you in person, hey, good to see you. But Dr. Ronke, I got so caught up that I didn't take you off. Sorry. Because this is really good to me. Sorry. I see Dr. Ronke sitting there like, okay, Jimmy, you gonna put yourself on the screen? There's some people, Dr. Ronke, that I don't know if I can tolerate what seeing a post for me does to my analytical space around impact and bro, how could you? And I just, so it at the end of the day, you got to be, I think you and I have talked, someone and I talked, somewhere this came up about to be selfless, you got to be selfish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and sometimes you have to make yourself the priority. And at some point when you're ready, don't have the argument, but say, hey, I was just in a space that I needed to do what I needed to do for me to be healthy, you know? And so there's the things of drinking water.
Yes.
I often tell people, you said the body keeps count, either through muscle or I've been taught through trauma work that toxins can build up in the body, and excuse the vernacular, but I used to tell people you need to pee. Because you're flushing. Am I right?
Yeah, you have to you have to find ways to flush it out of your system in some ways. Yeah.
And then journaling, and then, you know, yoga and walking and whatnot. And so, and ultimately, and I'm sure you will agree with this as being kind of the ending point, you might need to go to talk to somebody. I classify it jokingly is go laying on somebody's black couch.
Yes.
These days you can do it right here.
Yes. And even if it's short lived or you know, it doesn't have to be you're committing to, you know, a year of counseling or therapy. If you are in spaces where you have some limited access, I think for students, young people, you know, sometimes your school, or if you're in a, you know, in a program, they might have a resource where you can talk to a counselor for, you know, a few weeks in a row or something like that. But I think don't hesitate, to talk to someone. And I'll tell you, I've been scrolling through social media, looking at some of the social media groups that I'm a part of, where you have mental health professionals, and many of them today are posting things like, what am I supposed to say to my patients? What am I supposed to say? So at least, you know, you have empathy, you know, from you know, your mental health professionals as well, and they're not hopefully going to be in a position where they're, you know, they're addressing your needs from a distance, but they can address your needs as people who are also going through this themselves.
It is not, you know, the only time, you know, that we're going to need to, you know, have these conversations and hold the line. We have a few, it's just an interesting time. Dr. Ronke, I appreciate you not only for coming with us today, but you know, you're a researcher and you go into these spaces with life experience, with intentionality of doing what it is that needs to be done to inform, you know, the psychosomatic, you know, not industry, society, space, you know. The other thing I wanted to name is I've been doing this for a few years, and I've been able to kind of read folks when they say stuff. And there was a point there where you were talking about the NIH and and all this other stuff, and you. So,
no.
and I just named it. Research is a part, you know. Anyway, I just want to name for you that, you know, ensure that you're taking care of yourself as well. And, you know, asking folks to just put some great thoughts for Dr. Ronke in the comments as well. I appreciate you coming with us today. I'm going to go and share, talk about some of the comments I've seen over on Instagram that aren't in the clinical space, in some other spaces. But thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on, and everyone is in my thoughts. And you mentioned prayer, and everyone is in my prayers during this season. But I have hope. I think I have hope for us. And I think that's the important thing, is to maintain that hope as well.
Yes, ma'am. Hope. Absolutely. Dr. Ronke, thank you. I'm sure you got to get ready to get the patients or do notes and billing and all this other stuff that you still have to do. And
I want to thank you, Jimmy, for all that you do too, because these are difficult topics, and you engage with them so seamlessly, it feels like, and you're so authentic in how you engage with them. And I just want to also remind you that your space is a healing space for people. Like, you create that space because you're a leader in the community, and that's not an easy thing. So when you feel drained, like extra drained, it's because you're sort of creating that space for people, and that safe space for people. And And that is part of how we move forward, is by entering into these types of spaces with you. So I just want to thank you for creating that space for people in this time.
Thank you, Dr. Ronke. You get out of here, and we're going to go to commercial. Everybody, I appreciate you,
Bye,
sis. Thank you, and I look forward to chatting with you week after next to catch up.
Absolutely. See you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.
All right. Well, it's too late because when she got off the screen, I couldn't hide. Yeah. So we appreciate Dr. Ronke being here, and that was, as I said before, that was the intent prior to what we've seen in the last couple of hours. And so, just the it with all my opinion and commentary and whatnot, impact. Hopefully something that was said today is what's up. I see the folks from Real Boston Media in the room. Impact is always the goal. And so yeah. So we are together again tomorrow at 10 a.m. For those of you that tonight may want to experience some Black joy, we are at Grace by Nia for Beyond Berkeley. It's a showcase where the students from Berkeley come and they provide a service and perform for us, but it also gives them an opportunity to perform on one of the world's most renowned stages at Grace by Nia there in the Seaport. And so if you need some Black joy, consider coming out for that. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of folks that were over on Instagram. Dr. Rufus Falk was there and made some comments. Brother VOG. I believe that I always get, when it comes to social media names and who I really think it is. And the real G, good VOG, who I think that's Brother G. I won't say his government. Thank you for joining us today. We as a people have work to do. And what I mean by that is not an indictment. I know there was a lot of commentary around. I saw a post that said, the Obama's finger wagging and Obama's comments to, Black men. I'm not talking about that. We have a lot of work to do, first and foremost, within ourselves. The response I gave to someone this morning included some texts that essentially said, it's crazy because with the 5 or 6, hey, I need some encouragement, I got the text, hey, just checking on you. They mean those texts mean a lot. And what I said to that brother was, we live the best way we can to action by action, day by day, model behavior based in humanity, doing no harm. We live the best that we can to action by action, day by day, model behavior based in humanity, doing no harm. I think if that's a goal of us as individuals and as people, we start at that level. The work that we need to do as a people is also, we need to heal. There's a lot of healing that needs to take place in the Black community. And I'm specifically saying Black. And what I observed in some of the exit poll numbers, my proudness as a Black man has it picked up more 2020 George Floyd and everything. But I'm looking at some of these numbers, and as a Black man, a Black American, man or woman, a Black American that doesn't have the fluidity across the diaspora of the wonderful variation of cultures and languages and different countries and islands and whatnot, to just, with all the ancestry and all that other stuff we can find out where we're from and all that. But it is just, I haven't fully worked out what's running around in my head. But though BIPOC begins with the word B, and even in the word BIPOC beginning with B, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, which is inclusive of the diaspora and then those adjacent to the diaspora, people of color, some level, little bit melanin variation. It doesn't. I'm finding more instances than not. I think I said that right. That though that B is at the beginning of the word BIPOC, because everybody knows that when you aim for equity for Black people, take the word BIPOC. I wish I had a pen and a piece of paper because we could illustrate here. Take the word BIPOC and turn it left to where the flat part of the B is on the floor, on the table. On that B, indigenous, and I will name, it comes to this land and what's going on in this land. You can put the I under the B. Let's just be real about that. Now, it's a thought. So our goes in context of what I'm about to say. Land-wise, you put the I under the B. Land. But when you think about the word BIPOC and flip it like that and put that flat part on the floor, on the table, whatever, drawing it on a piece of paper, and that B is down and the I, the P, the O, the C is on top. When you aim for equity for the B, everybody benefits. And it is the B that holds a lot of the movements around equity in this country. From sexual orientation, rightfully so. Those that, and I learned this the other day, the woman said, Jimmy, you can say people with disabilities because the people are prioritized. The advocacy and activism and things that we've had to do as Black Americans sets the model for every other marginalized community's advocacy and activism. Pure facts. Debate me. So that's a consideration that I had to sit with, and I'm sitting with. Dr. Miller, I call her AJ. Dr. Miller put a post up, and it resonated with me on a few levels. It's a meme. And it's interesting. To my white, non-racist friends, I love you all. Don't get it twisted. Me loving and protecting my race does not mean I hate or fault you. We know exactly who our enemies are. They're no longer hiding it. Thank you for standing with us. To those that really understand allyship, to the to the 47% of white women that voted Democratic, to the, we talk about allies, to the 39% of white men that voted Democratic. Some of these exit poll numbers are interesting. I haven't combed through them enough to continue to make a whole lot of assertions. All right. I got a text. I was making sure I'm not getting in trouble. I don't know what that is, but interesting day in history. America has spoken. And what America has said for a lot of us is hard to hear. But one thing we can trust is our vice president, who will have to certify these results, is going to be the leader, the woman of excellence, the woman that jumped in and over a few months, a lot of the pundits are stating that she did a lot better than Uncle Joe would have. Please note that what she was able to do was huge. Two things here, and I'll shut up. One is, as the vice president, as a vice anything, especially if you're the first vice, your number one job is being number two. You have influence. You know, should she have usurped political tradition and as the vice president never separate herself from the full support of the president? That will be debated on CNN, Fox, and Newsmax, and all these other places. But that woman needs to be celebrated. And it's so interesting. Our congresswoman stopped through last night and she told us, I think it was 52, if somebody can put the year and check on me, check for me. Shirley Chisholm ran. Either not announced, obviously, because of time of year, election day. Shirley Chisholm ran for president, black woman. I said to someone that Kamala Harris is our generation Shirley Chisholm. What she was able to do with the money that she raised was incredible, despite a party's disenfranchising of, I'm not going to go there. I will say this, and I should have said it in the beginning, and in the context of, because some of y'all I'm really not going to deal with. I just make a decision that I'm not. I'm going to block you. And, you know, it's where you can be hospitable, but I can't deal with you on social media. And I'll end with this. For me, I can't wrap my head around the concept of a human being's ability to support someone who is a bona fide, perpetuated generational racist, a convicted rapist, and authoritarian and asserted day one dictator. For me, James William Isaac Hills, James Jimmy Hills, Java with Jimmy, Java, me. It skates along the lines of character, values, morals. And with all that Dr. Ronke named about the validity, this is a thought, so I'm going to share it. And I don't say this in a malicious way, but there was a lot of ignorance to the electoral process. By my opinion and observation, the inability to see the bigger picture. That person said something last night that promises made, I don't know if it was verbatim, promises kept. Notice you haven't heard the term Project 2025 in the last few days. Outside of some posts that I've seen that say, get ready for it. And so the foundation for my inability to just in a virtual space engage with some people is in the fact that I can't disassociate your support away from my impression of that whom you're supporting. It just right now, and even before last night, I was watching some stuff on social media the past few months, and I'm like, oh, not blanketly, but support. Anyway, I'm getting off of here. It's 11:04. UCB members, y'all get 90 minutes today. You get more of me tomorrow. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. I want to thank Dr. Ronke for coming in and setting some space and sharing some self-care suggestions with us. Nisi said, and don't forget that he's a liar. I believe that. I at the end of the day, I'll tell y'all last night, I was sitting there and discernment and whatnot was kicking in, and Elder Hills almost, whew, I said, oh, Jesus. But yeah, I want to leave us with this today. And I think it's so appropriate to hear her today. I've shared it before. First thing I'm going to do is share a little funny thing with you all, just so we can end with some black joy and make you all laugh. To my brother and friend and manager, forever manager. Just enjoy this little clip real quick.
Microphone check 1 2. Here we go. Java with Jimmy live at the City Winery. Microphone check 1 2. How you doing? I am well. Are you? We just here to have a good time. We're here to have a good time with everybody, hanging out at City Winery. I'm gonna perform, and they're taking pictures of us. So I'm gonna do like this real quick.
So this one I'm going to play is, where is it? Do I still have it? Because we need some black joy, but they might get me. I was going to show the Davis Systems. All I do is think of you. Yeah. The last thing we'll close out with is from 2020. I think it was the second Black Joy event Uncle Thaddeus had. And Kathy Drain, I think I got it right, spoke at that event. And I played this a lot during 2020. And I think it's so apropos that we play it today to just remind us of who we are. Because all that commentary I gave about being Black in America, it's real. And it's never, yeah, I know. I've lived it 53 years. But looking at that map last night, and the increased numbers, and yeah, y'all can say it was about ground game and all of that. But a ground is a ground. It will only produce what it's tilled to produce. But what's in the ground is still there. And so they did well at bringing out what was in the ground, their ground game. So we're going to end with Kathy. We'll see you all tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Have a great day, everybody. Remember to drink more water. Remember, even if you don't journal, if you're sitting at work or whatever, or use your phone, if you just need to type out, get it out, get it out, get it out. I felt myself like an old mother at the altar. Get it out, give it up, give it up, get it out. Seriously. I'm glad I'm at Grace tonight because being around some folks is going to be good. But as my mom said, God is still on the throne to despite. And we are little G's, black gods and goddesses. Forever keep that in mind. Despite what America says, despite what he who is elected leader of America says, remember who we are.
And I just want you to embrace it. Because when I first started this weekend was supposed to be a weekend of healing. And that weekend of healing came from my sister, Kathy Durang, who's a resident service coordinator in one of the housing communities here. There's an amazing, amazing sister that does some amazing work in the community. Started the first Freedom School here in Boston and in the state, and is doing some amazing work. So I just want to give her an opportunity to talk about Black joy and what it means to her, and to open us up. So, Sister Kathy, I'm calling everybody sister, brother, but Queen Kathy.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. So, when I think of Black joy, before I was doing community work, I was in theater. So you all have to bear with me. I use a lot of movie references. So when I think of Black joy, two scenes come to mind. Y'all know Beloved? You remember that scene when Baby Suge was in the field and she said, "Children laugh, men dance, women weep for the living and for the dead." When I think about that scene, for me encapsulates what Black joy is. When we remember that our responsibility is to create the space where our children can laugh, where they can experience innocence that the world sometimes denies them. When we remember that our men, beautiful Black men, can dance, that they don't have to always bear the burden of being stoic, that they can dance and we can revel in their joy. And our women, that baby girls, we can weep. We don't have to be strong. And even in that weeping, we still are powerful, we still are capable, and we still will make things happen. So that's the first scene. The second scene that means so much to me, and I know we're also grieving the loss of Chadwick Boseman, is y'all know in the scene in Black Panther where M'Baku is kicking his butt and Queen Mother says what?
Remember?
You got it, James? What do you say?
Remember who
say
you
it
are.
loud.
Remember who you are.
Remember who you are. Remember who you are. The underneath Black joy, underneath our essence, what makes us a powerful community is that no matter what they put before us, our strength comes from remembering who we are. We are the children of those who survived the slave ships. That's who we are. We did not die. Though we falter, we remain faithful. And every day that we can connect to one another and remember that, and even if you don't know your brothers and sisters in this community, if you can do that, If you can look them in the eyes on the days when it's tough and it's hard and we're trying to figure out how to make it better in Roxbury and Dorchester and Mattapan, if you see somebody that looks like they need to hear that, just give them that look and say, remember who you are. Remember who you are. And so for me, that's Black joy. It's what makes us who, it's our melanated existence. And as long as we can hold to that, we will be successful no matter what is thrown at us. Black joy, remember who you are.